Today we're going to create a kimono sleeve. The kimono sleeve is back in fashion. It comes in and out of fashion, but as you can see here, this is the trend direction for spring summer 15. And so a kimono sleeve, how it's different is that it is actually part of the bodice. Now, one thing to keep in mind with a kimono sleeve is that it is a very loose fitting sleeve. So as you see with all of these designs, there's very little fit in the bodice area. Now, it does still fit across the bust, but there's lots of fullness with a kimono sleeve. So to do a kimono sleeve, we want to use, again, either the tapered or the straight sleeve. I'm going to use the straight sleeve because that's what's trending right now. So to start off, I need to add a point that is halfway on the hem. So there should be one that's halfway on the cap and then one that's halfway on the hem. So just in proportion, select 0.5 so that we have the halfway point. Then I'm going to select a draft line and I'm going to add a point and draft to the hem. And then I'm going to build piece. So I'm going to build the back and then build the front. And I'm going to move these pieces away here. And so that I don't get confused on what's what, I'm just going to temporarily label these things as the back sleeve and the front sleeve. Again, they're going to be part of the bodice, so this is just a temporary label so that I know what I'm doing a little bit later on. I'm going to get rid of the piece that I was working on off the work area so that I again have a clean work area with just my back and my front. So now I'm going to pair up the front pieces with the back pieces. The next thing that you want to do is that you want to get the bodice pieces ready for your sleeve transfer, adding that sleeve onto the back and the front, as well as keeping in mind as to whether you want this to be short, like a crop top, or long. So I'm going to manipulate my darts. So on the book in the back, in figure 1 on page 334, it has to take my shoulder dart and rotate it to my armhole, like we have done many other times. And delete those dart images. And delete the extra grade points. Get my shaping back. Then also for the back, you always, whenever you have rotated that dart, you have to adjust the grain line parallel to segment, rotate to grain line. And again, get rid of extra grade points. So now your back is ready. And the front, you can leave as if it is, if it's going to be a crop top, but if it's going to be a torso, in other words, we're going to add on that skirt, we want to prepare our bodice for the torso block. Now, we're not adding on the skirt until the very end, but what I mean is that a torso block is always working from a 2 dart block rather than a 1 dart. So I'm going to select my dart, and I'm going to go rotate to point, select my 1 inch below my armhole, and have 50% in the bust and 50% in the waist. And then again, get rid of any extra grade points that you may have. Also, if you have any seam allowance on this, make sure that you are getting rid of seam allowance on any of your pieces here, that you should not have any seam allowance. Okay, then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to attach our back sleeve to the back bodice, front sleeve to the front bodice. So for the back first, you can see in illustration 3 here that the first thing that it says is to raise the back 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to zoom in here, select my shoulder point, move point, and move up 1/4 of an inch. You can see that I have an extra little point in there. I'm going to get rid of that little point there. So I have raised up the back here. Now she has just to draft a line, but I'm going to use my sleeve as my guide. So I'm going to flip over my sleeve, and I'm going to select the middle of the sleeve cap and the move tool. Take the middle of the sleeve cap and attach it to my armhole shoulder point, so right on top. Then I'm going to reselect that point and then go to the rotate tool. And the trick to the rotate is the last point that I selected is the pivot point. And I'm going to select the opposite diagonal point in which to rotate it. So it's working basically like geometry would do, in that you're using a pivot point. Now, where do I pivot that to? I'm going to pivot it so that my armhole here touches my side seam. So the armhole touches the side seam, and then just click on OK. So if I zoomed in here, you will see that the shoulder and the sleeve are not at the same angle, that the sleeve drops slightly. And that's the way that you want that sleeve to be. Then she has to draw a curved line. So I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, we've already dropped our sleeve, and we have dropped it, or the armhole if you will, we've already dropped it 1 3/8 of an inch. So it's going to be a pretty big armhole anyway. So that curve, you don't want to be too big. And so I would suggest just adding 1 to 1.5 inches from your bust. You have that bust point where you had rotated as a rotation tool, so just 1 to 1.5 points, and that will be where the beginning of your draft point is. So again, sticking pretty close to the sleeve. And now I'm going to use the shift tool to create a curved line here. And then we just draw a nice little curved line to attach the bodice to the sleeve. Now my next step is then to use the trace segments tool. And so select the center back, the waist, the dart, and that little draft line. My neck. And here's my back piece. Now I'm going to work on the front piece here. So I'm going to zoom in here on the front. And you will see that it first says to take a portion of my waist dart and move it up in to the armhole. And so a guide is that it's approximately half. So I'm going to take my waist dart and rotate it up here to the middle of my armhole, and select half of it. And then I'm going to get rid of those dart images. Smooth out my armhole here. Okay, so I've got that armhole piece smoothed out. And now I'm going to basically do the same thing that I did to the back. I'm going to select the cap of my sleeve. I'm going to use the move tool, move it to the shoulder armhole intersection. Select the point again, select the rotate tool, select the opposite side, which I'm going to pivot here, and I'm going to pivot until I touch the armhole seam. So you can see there's this big gap in here, and that's that looseness that we are creating in our kimono sleeve. So now I've got my point here actually at 1 inch, and I'm going to delete this little point and make it 1.5 from the bust, because that's where I was on my back. I'm going to select my draft tool. I'm going to select the shift key, hold it down to make a curve point. This is what's different between Tech and Adobe Illustrator. Holding down the shift key in Illustrator is to make a straight line, and in Tech it's to make a curved line. So here's my line here. And then I'm going to do the trace segments tool. And I've got my piece. Now I'm going to send away those original pieces. And I've got my my front and my back, and they look very similar, so you may want to label them at this point. so that you just know what the front end is and what the back piece is. Now, if we were to look at our illustrations here, what's WGSN is showing in fashion is that the sleeve is going to the elbow or slightly below, like a 3/4 sleeve. And right now what I have is a long sleeve. So if I were to go to the elbow, then I'm going to add a point halfway on my sleeve, so 0.5 and 0.5. And then I'm going to use the draft tool. Create a perpendicular line. Then again, I can now do build piece. So I've got my pieces here. I've got my short sleeve. And so now I'm going to get rid of, again, any extra little pieces here that I don't want. So again, just to keep that kind of straight. Now if I want this to be longer, I would go get my skirt pieces for my front and for my back. And we're going to do just like we did with the torso block. I'm going to match at our side point best we can. And you can use a guideline to make sure that you're lining up perfectly straight between the skirt and our kimono piece. And then trace segments, and you can decide that at this point you can make a dress if you wanted to, but I'm going to just go ahead and go to the hip line here. Make sure that you get your curve. And then I'm going to do the same for the back piece here. Front. And so you see that I've got pieces, extra little pieces here, and I've got my front, my back. Just have to get rid of. Oops. Sometimes you have to build a piece twice, or you have to kind of get rid of some extra points if it grabbed those points. I'm gonna show you how to clean up the torso piece. And again, just kind of get rid of extra little pieces that you don't need, extra little lines that you don't need. Make curve points. and clean it up by deleting any extra points. Now you notice that this grain line is not in a position where I want it, and so I can use move internal, which is the hand with the small little yellow piece, and pick up my grain line to move it. And then I may need to just kind of reshape a little bit, because again this is for a woven, not a knit. So I don't want it too contoured in there. And there, I've got some good shaping. And a kimono sleeve is generally on the half. So I would select my half and view my half. So here's my shape that I have right there for my top. And then I would add the seam allowance. So the last little thing is to select my seam allowance. And then of course the neck is 1/4. So I have to go back in and select that to be 1/4 for my neck and switch to cut. And there I have my piece, and I would want to clean up my back piece as well. So this particular piece, again, it's the front. And it is a kimono. There's one piece for the front. And there's your top. And you are done with your kimono sleeve.